What's up, everybody? So, welcome back to another episode of The Third Divide. My guest today is Summer Peyton. She spent a lot of her life living in both the Philippines and Texas. So, Summer, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
For most of my childhood, I grew up in the Philippines. And then going into adolescent slash teen years, I guess we moved back to Texas. And so then I grew up junior high and high school in Austin, Texas area. Yes.
All right. So, you went to the Philippines twice.
Yes. So I lived there as a child. So for almost 10 years, from age 3 till age 12, almost 12 and a half. Lived in the Philippines. And then as an adult, I actually moved back and was teaching English in the Philippines.
How was the first time different from the second time? Which one was harder?
That's a good question. Which one was harder? I would say the one as an adult was harder just because I had romanticized the Philippines and romanticized what I remembered and all the good parts about it. And don't get me wrong, like all those good parts were true, but I just also didn't really include any possible negatives. And then also living as an adult and being on my own and having bills to pay and a job to work and all of those things were obviously a lot different than growing up as a child and not having to stress about money and getting to go and do things and stuff like that. So not having responsibilities as a child is obviously a lot easier than going back and being an adult and then having to deal with all of that. And then on top of that, I also had a lot of culture shock, which was kind of surprising for me, just because like I grew up there. So to me, it was like my home. And then I went back and I kind of had a lot of struggles with that. And when I went back, I was also working for some people that I grew up knowing. And so there was a lot of challenges with that because they promised a lot of things that they did not come through with. And so that part was pretty challenging. And they didn't really give me a lot of support in moving back because they also were like, well, she grew up here. She knows a lot of stuff. But I also moved back to the States when I was so little that I also don't have a lot of the memories. Like I didn't know how to get around necessarily or where things were, but they just assumed I did. So that was pretty challenging as an adult to go back to.
So, speaking of culture shock, w- do you think you faced more of a culture shock when you went to the Philippines or when you moved back to the States?
When I moved back to the States, for sure. Um, Especially the first time around, because there was a lot of, I think, expectations, because obviously I'm white and I'm American. And so there was a lot of expectations that, well, she's white, she's American, she should just be able to fit in here. But I didn't. I didn't really understand the American culture because all I knew of it was coming back for vacation. I got to go to like Fiesta, Texas, or to Six Flags, or to SeaWorld, and got to do all these fun things, go to the mall and shop for clothes, but I never had to live here. And so I really didn't understand a lot of the pop culture, especially. I didn't really know how to dress in America. I didn't know a lot of ins and outs, and especially going into seventh grade, which is already a really tough time for most kiddos. That was really challenging. Um, so yeah, I'd say coming back from the Philippines as an adolescent was probably the hardest culture shock that I ever had to deal with.
hmm Did you ever speak Tagalog at all? That's the language they speak in the Philippines, right?
Yeah, so Tagalog is the national language, but there's actually over 100 different languages in the Philippines. And so I grew up speaking Cebuano, but whenever I came back to the States, we had to learn Spanish, and Spanish and Cebuano are very, very similar. And so I got really confused, like in my head, like I was like, okay, which language goes to what location? And so I got pretty mixed up. Like even the how are you. So in Spanish, it's como estás. And then in the Philippines, in Cebuano, it's como está. But you can also say como está in Spanish. And so it was very challenging. And so I lost a lot of my Cebuano. My dad is fluent. And so he can still text me in Cebuano and I can still kind of figure out what he's saying for the most part. Or if I'm listening to somebody speak in Cebuano, I can pick out probably about, now I'd say closer to 50%. It used to be more. Um, but yeah, I don't have my language skills anymore in that, and I'm pretty sad about that.
That's pretty unfortunate, but do you feel like uh being able to speak the language when you were in the Philippines, did it help you acclimate a little more? And but did it also help or like aid with the culture shock that you faced when you came back to the States?
Um, I mean, it definitely helped. Like I never really remember learning Cebuano formally, like in school or anything. Like I know we had some Cebuano classes in school, but I don't remember like formally like grammar and stuff like that. I don't really remember a whole lot of that. So I mostly grew up speaking it with like my friends and the different people that were in our house every single day. So my parents were missionaries, and so we spoke it a lot at church. Like I grew up going to church and hearing it, and like Cebuano was how they taught. And like I sang in Cebuano, like I sang church songs in Cebuano. So like it was just part of life. Like I didn't know any different. And then as far as it aiding me, I don't think it necessarily aided me whenever we moved back to the States. My parents didn't really speak it a lot when we moved back, which I kind of was really bummed about because I think we lost a lot of it. My mom is no longer fluent. My dad still is, like I said, but I wish we had kept that up so that I could have kept up the language. And then I wouldn't have had so many challenges with knowing where Spanish went and Cebuano ended, kind of thing.
Hmm. Gotcha. So when and how did you realize you were a TCK?
So I found out about TCKs about 7 years after I'd already been back in the States.
Hmm.
So we moved back to the States in 2005, and it was in 2012. Actually, one of my friends started talking to me about it in 2011, and there's actually a camp that she tried to get me to go to for TCKs. And but it's funny because she didn't explain the camp very well, and she really did not explain what TCKs were. So I was like, no, I'm not going. This sounds dumb. And so then she sent me like the TCK book by Ruth Van Recken and Michael Pollock. And so I read some of it after a while, like after having it for a while, and I was like, this is my soul. Like you're reading my soul. What is this? And so then I was like, okay, tell me more about this camp. Like, when is it? Where is it? What is this? And so I ended up going in 2012, which was right before my sophomore year of college. And I remember, so it's at Oklahoma Christian, and they provide the facilities for us, which is awesome. And so it's called Global Reunion, but I love it. I go every year. I've gone every year since then. But I remember sitting after going to camp the first day. We went back to the dorm room that night, and I remember sitting on the bed thinking, huh, I'm not weird. And it's okay to think the things I think and feel the things I feel. Because up until that point, I'd never known that. And so I finally felt understood and recognized after being able to go to that camp, just the first day of camp. So that was kind of my beginning journey of finding out about TCKs. And after that, I kind of deep dived into research, and because I was also studying like basic understanding of psychology, sociology, counseling, social work. That was my undergrad. And so yeah, I really dove into kind of trying to figure out research on TCKs and figuring out more about me and why I am the way I am and what I struggle with. So yeah, that's kind of where I found out about it and where my journey of TCKness started.
So the fact that the TCKs, and like there are many types of TCKs,
Hmm.
right? But generally, we all go through similar experiences,
Hmm.
even though that there are many different types.
Yeah.
And then there's also this one element which is not having too much stability in life. You know, you're moving from one place to one place. Does that ever bother you? Because I personally know some TCKs that heavily bothered.
Um, that's a tough question that I'm currently wrestling with in life. Of where am I gonna kind of stay, or if I'm gonna stay anywhere. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's necessarily bothered me. It has been challenging to kind of form and build substantial relationships in one place. Um, but I know there's like a term like 2 year, 3 year itchy feet kind of syndrome. And I definitely get that. I'm like, okay, been here for a year or two. It's time to go. Like, what's next? What's new? But I think I'm starting to approach the idea or possibility of kind of settling, which is kind of absolutely terrifying for me. Um, but I wouldn't say it's bothered me. It's just been a fact of life, if that makes sense.
Did you ever find it a little hard to, maintain all the connections to the people that you've met in, either the States or the Philippines, or like in the multiple cities that you've lived in? Was that hard, or was that even something that you wanted to do? Because, there are some TCKs who just, they don't want to make any connection because, you know, if they're going to leave eventually, then what's the point?
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's something that I have had to figure out which relationships are worth it. Um, and I think I have figured out like, okay, this person is valuable enough to kind of keep in my life regardless of where I move to. So yeah, there are certain people in different parts of my life that I've met in different locations. So, and they're still in my life. We may not talk every day because that's just impossible. But whenever we do get to talk, it's like catching up and like almost as if no time has passed, and we're still as close as we ever were. Um, so yeah, it's challenging to kind of keep up with some of those relationships, but I have figured out which ones are worth it to me. And on the other end, which people are willing to kind of put up with my transient lifestyle and who are still willing to have that relationship with me regardless of my transience. And those people, I'm like, okay, you're clearly putting in an effort, I'm going to continue putting in this effort, and we will continue building this relationship even if I live in this continent and you live in another continent. So um yeah, and then the other people who haven't made that effort, then okay, there was a season, and that's okay. We're in different locations now, and that's fine.
So, looking back at everything you've been through, what are the main benefits that you've gained by becoming a TCK, and what are the main challenges?
I'd say trying to decide which one I want to start with, the challenges or the benefits. I'll start with the benefits. I guess a broader worldview
Mm-hmm.
and a bigger perspective on people. So I am now a therapist and I work in a psychiatric hospital at the moment. And it is my goal to eventually work with TCKs. So I think a lot of the things that I've lived through and seen and experienced in Texas, in the Philippines, in different parts of the world that I have traveled to, other than that, um, has given me a unique set of abilities to kind of talk with people and connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I have a heart for people and a heart for people who are struggling, whether it is within the TCK lifestyle or in the broader term in the CCK cross cultural kid lifestyle, such as immigrant kids, refugee kiddos, just different people from different walks of life. And I treasure that ability to be able to do that. So that's been a huge benefit for me. And then just my appreciation for different cultures and different types of people. Um, I love that. I love working. So like I said, I work in a psychiatric hospital, and it's in Houston, and it's a very diverse population of people that I get to work with. Not just my coworkers, but patients as well. And so my coworkers, like I have actually a lot of coworkers who are CCKs. Their parents immigrated over here, and so they have that cultural aspect that their parents bring, and then also being raised in America. So it's pretty awesome. Like I feel at home when I'm with them because of that. Um, and then some of the challenges is not feeling like I ever really belong anywhere. Um, unless I'm with TCKs. That is the one place that I do feel like I belong truly. But it's been really hard to figure out what parts of me I'm willing to show to people who aren't TCKs, like showing bits and pieces, I guess. I you Have you heard of the term like chameleon, screamer, and wallflower? Like when it comes to TCKs?
Not really, no.
Okay, so chameleon, obviously chameleons like to like match or mimic what their background is, so like they can blend in and be safe. Wallflowers, like literally like, oh, like on the wall, like you're just kind of blending in, hiding back away, kind of observing the room, seeing what's going on. And then screamer has to do with more like, hey, I grew up in the Philippines, I'm a missionary kid, like I'm going to show you all these things. And so when it comes to not being around TCKs, I would consider myself a chameleon. I kind of blend into my surroundings and the people that I am around. So like, for example, I went to undergrad in Lubbock, Texas, which is very West Texas, very country. So I learned how to two-step dance and like all those like country dances. And I definitely had a stronger Texas accent whenever I lived there. And then now that I'm here in Houston and I have more of an ability to kind of be a little more cultural, I very much dress more culturally unique to like the different life that I've lived. But even with that, I still tend to blend in depending on the crowd that I'm with. But when it comes to TCKs, I'm able to be who I truly am in all aspects of things. So anyways, that's a big spiel. But challenges would be feeling like I don't fit in anywhere, and that I don't really belong anywhere except for with TCKs most of the time. And then I really struggled with my identity growing up, and figuring out who I am, because especially when we moved back from the Philippines, it was expected, like I said, to be able to fit in because I'm white and American. And for the longest time, I really didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be in America. I didn't like a lot of aspects of being in America. And so that was really challenging. But at the same time, I wasn't Filipina and I didn't really fit in there. I was always the foreigner there. So, yeah, there was just a lot of different challenges with that. And then just grieving the life that I lost whenever we had to move back to the States, and not really understanding that I was grieving, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. That makes total sense. So, you actually brought up CCKs and, immigrant kids, refugee kids. Do you ever feel like there's a parallel between the three groups?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think so. So when it comes to CCKs, like I would say CCKs are much more of an overarching umbrella, and they definitely can fit a whole lot of kiddos. And I think TCKs are a subgroup of CCKs. And so, yeah, I definitely think they experience a lot of different things that TCKs go through. because I mean, we're technically a subset of them,
Yeah, and so you mentioned how you felt like you were a foreigner in the Philippines, but then you also felt like you didn't really perfectly fit in Texas.
Mhm.
Was there one place in particular where you felt like a little more? I know this is a hard question, but like, you felt a little more at home, right? You get what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, I do. Um, the only place that I've honestly ever felt the most at home at is like at that camp that I was talking about and being around other third culture kids or other cross cultural kids. Really feeling like this is where I fit in and this is where I belong and this is where I can be my full me. Um, or I feel also most at peace in between. So like on airports or in airports and airplanes, like
Oh yeah.
it's like my favorite place. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
here's travel. This is comfortable. I know airports like the back of my hand. Like, let's go. I can do these things. So
A familiar
those are
setting.
definitely things. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like for most TCKs, being in airports is the best place for them. It's
Hmm.
like it kind of like brings back the nostalgia, but it also makes them feel like they're at home, even though they're in an airport.
Yeah.
Like it's the furthest thing away from home.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also like the most comforting because it's like, this is normal to me.
Yeah, because that's what most TCKs grow up with. It's like, traveling around, going from place to place and not staying in one place for long. That's the normalcy of it.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Summer, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.